Everyone. Welcome to tonight's program, which is Otherness in Fiction, Getting It Right. My name is Diane, and I work at the Johnson County Library. I'll be facilitating tonight's program. And now I'm very happy to introduce tonight's speaker. Gabino Iglesias is a writer, editor, professor, and book critic living in Austin, Texas. He's the author of Zero Saints and Coyote Songs and the editor of Both Sides. His work has been nominated to the Bram Stoker and Locus Awards and won the Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel. His nonfiction appeared in the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times, and his fiction has been published in 5 languages and optioned for film. His reviews appear in places like NPR, Publishers Weekly, the San Francisco Chronicle, Criminal Element, Mystery Tribune, Volume 1, Brooklyn, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and other venues. He's been a juror for the Shirley Jackson Awards twice and has judged the Big Book Contest, the Splatterpunk Awards, the horror category of the British Fantasy Awards, and the Newfound Prose Prize. He also teaches creative writing at Southern New Hampshire University's online MFA program and runs a series of low-cost online writing workshops. You can find him on Twitter at Gabino_Iglesias. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gabino.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much for that intro. I need to start sending out a shorter bio. I was going to start by saying, first of all, thank you for being here. Welcome. I hope this is very productive. And I was also going to say that please feel free to drop questions in that little Q&A box at the bottom. Obviously, I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end of this thing to tackle just absolutely any question that I've missed. But if I'm talking about a very specific topic and you have an idea that you think it'd be better to discuss now, please don't feel like you're interrupting me. We'll tackle it as soon as I see it and move forward that way. We already have one in there from Leah who's asking if this will be recorded. I believe so. I had an event here last night. I was talking horror with Jeremy Robert Johnson. We had a great discussion, and I believe that was recorded. And it'll be available. I don't know if this one will be available after we're done, but I'm guessing it'll be like the one that we did yesterday. If not, I will put, again, the contact info in there, and I'll include my email in case there's any lingering questions or anything else that you think you might want to reach out and talk about. And here's the reason why that might happen. The reason why that might happen is because the subject that we're going to be talking about today is not the type of subject that you can get out of the way in 45 minutes. In fact, this is just a very small portion of a much larger workshop that I created about a year and a half ago because I was teaching at Southern New Hampshire University, and we spent an entire week talking about writing the other. At the end of that, the mentality of students, we're moving on to the next thing. I don't want to be the one person to have this question answered in public. So I kept getting emails from students from past terms who are now working on their dissertation or their final project or a novel on the side because they had already graduated. And they came at me with questions about otherness. Like, I'm a 42-year-old lesbian living in California, and I kind of want to write about this thing that includes an African-American man living up in New York 50 years ago. Can I do that? It's a very interesting, very touchy subject that's thankfully finally being discussed as much as it should have been discussed for the past 20 years. The good part about this is that writers, readers, publishers, editors, agents, everyone's paying a little bit more of attention. Everyone is kind of, they got the idea that maybe presenting women in a certain way is not going to fly by anymore. We're not going to allow men to write about women in a very specific way, time and time again. We are not going to let authors get away with racism and misogyny and sexism and ageism, any of that. There shall be no bigotry, which is not to say we cannot write bigoted characters, but we are paying attention to the discourse around certain books, and also about the way that publishing is reacting to all of these conversations. For many years, it was like, yeah, we need more books that feature women main characters. Let's get, the typical older white straight male bestsellers to write about women, because that's, it'll be fine. We need more LGBTQ narratives. Let's get the perennial white, straight, older men to write some LGBTQ characters. Let's get them to write characters of color. And that wasn't necessarily doing the trick in terms of representation and diversifying literature. Thankfully, now we're seeing a couple of steps in the right direction. This doesn't mean that it's perfect yet. This does not mean that we are completely done. I invite each and every one of you to go and check out the reports that Lee and Lowe put out every single year. I've given keynotes that rely heavily on their information that they gather from the publishing business, to talk about something just random that kind of embodies the way that things still work in publishing. I'm a professional literary critic. I'm a book reviewer. I write for the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, NPR. You heard all of those other places. On any given year, if we're lucky, we will get between 4 and 7% of the reviewers' pool in the United States will be people of color. That means that if you read work by 100 reviewers, regardless of the book, chances are that between 4 and 7 will be written by individuals of color. Between the year 2000 and the year 2020, that's 2 decades, there's been a real push for diversity. And the end result of that is better numbers. But in 2020, there were 34 #1 New York Times bestsellers. 32 were white folks and 2 were people of color. That's not saying, we haven't done some progress. We just haven't done enough progress. And we're battling this day in and day out. In our case, and I assume most of you here are writers as well, for us, everything begins and ends on the page, all right? We create narratives, whether that's romance, YA, horror, crime, thrillers, noir, sci-fi, romance, historical fiction. It doesn't really matter what you do. This is a thing now that is out there and that you have to tackle. I did not create the workshops just for my students. I created the workshop because I wanted to have this conversation with people, and I wanted to let them know that there are right ways and wrong ways to do things. I don't think somebody out in California, like a friend of mine, a 42-year-old white straight man who sort of started panicking and dropped me an email, Gabino, can I write a female character of color? Like, am I gonna get canceled? Are folks gonna come at me because I did that? The answer is no. We write fiction, which means that we can create whatever it is that we want to create. But there are certain things that we have to be very careful about, because this is a sort of mashed together, compact version of the larger workshop. I'm going to give you some of the main pointers on how to do this right. And in order to know what to do right, usually the best place to begin is by studying what we do wrong. All right. So when I was putting this thing together about a year and a half ago, what I did was I tried to look at every single book that I'd read in the previous 3 years that had made me cringe. All right. A book that on some level had made me feel uncomfortable because of the way that it talked about gay characters or black characters or brown characters or disabled characters. And then I took notes. This is why this made me uncomfortable. And then I created a very short list that we're going to go through right now on some of the problems, all right? When we're talking about otherness, when we're talking about diversity. And then obviously, please understand that when we're talking about otherness and diversity here, we're talking about writing a character that is not you. So if you're a 30-year-old woman, when you write a man, unless you're on your way to becoming a man, that's not you. If you're a black person writing a white person or an Asian person, that's also you tackling otherness. So this isn't white centered. You can be a Latino, and in my case, if I'm writing a Latino man in a wheelchair, that's not my reality. I do not understand what it is like to be disabled. So I have to do certain things in order to get it right. It doesn't mean that I'm not prohibited. I'm not breaking any laws by writing a character in a wheelchair. It does mean that I have to put extra care and attention. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about research. But first, let's tackle those list of problems. The first list of in that list of problems, the first problem is cliches. As someone who teaches creative writing and someone who also writes and tries to sell as many books as possible, I can tell you this: cliches are awesome, all right? Cliches are soul food for readers. If you write a book about a haunted house, you will encounter people who say, oh, I heard you have a new book out. What is it about? And you'll say, it's about a haunted house. And a lot of people will go, oh my God, a haunted house book. I'm going to go to Amazon and get it right now. That's what you want. That's a victory. They didn't ask about your research. They didn't ask about your character development. They didn't ask about the plot of the book, your world building process. They didn't care about any of that. They said, all right, it's a horror book about a haunted house. I want it. The same happens when we start talking about genre. Why is romance so popular nowadays? Because God knows we need some happy endings. We want to believe that there's love for each and every one of us. And we like the idea of riding off into the sunset, happily ever after. That thing is needed. When folks turn to classic LA, New York, 1950s, noir, the PI with the drinking problem and the fedora, listening to John Coltrane. Chances are you've seen those books or you've read those books, and yet we get a whole bunch of them every single year. Books that contain those same cliches. And that's completely fine, all right? As I mentioned before, cliches are soul food for readers. They turn to them, they crave more of it. Cliches are absolutely horrible when it comes to people, all right? If you're writing a novel, if you're writing a short story, each one of those characters in your narrative should be yours. It should be a character that you, quote unquote, birthed. You created this person. You gave them a background. You gave them ideas. You gave them an identity. If suddenly you find yourself writing a character who's an Asian skinny dude with glasses who's the hacker, a tall, busty blonde in a short dress who has no business being there other than to look good at the bar, If you have the sassy gay hairdresser who has all the dirt on everyone, if you have the young black thug dressed like he's going to a basketball game with the cornrows, dropping the N-word, if you have the stucky Latino with tattoos and a tattooed tear who says essay at the end of every sentence, we're going to get the man essay, we're going to get the drugs essay, you have a problem in your hands. And the problem is this: those are cliches. Those characters do not belong to you. Those characters are out there in a million stories, in a million TV shows, in a million, bad jokes. If they don't belong to you, they have no space in your narrative. Everything in your narrative should be yours. Even if you're telling a haunted house story, a happy romance story, a YA coming-of-age story about a chosen one, you can play with those cliches, but you should leave the cliches alone when you're talking about people. And that's something that folks usually do when they're talking about the other. I don't know the other. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but I read 6 bad noirs that told me that being a woman was thinking about breasts and my hair, shoes, and purses. So those are the 4 things I want to put into this woman in my book. It's not how that works. You have to give that individual a whole life. I know it sounds like a lot of work. You'll get used to it. You're probably already trying to do that anyway. And you already know that some of that life doesn't end up on the page. But for readers who are paying attention, they will understand that there's more to that character than being black or brown or Asian or female or a member of the LGBTQ community. The second thing in that list, and this is something that I call the twin lacks, is lack of respect. When we write a quote unquote bad guy, a bad woman, a bad character, many writers tend to pay a lot of attention to how this character plays a role within the narrative. When we focus just on the role that this character plays within the context of this narrative, what we tend to do is, this is a bad guy. We all know what bad guys do and what they look like. Bad guys are not 6'4" underwear models, all right? So then you start reading the stories and the bad guy is always short or fat or bald or ugly or has acne or a greasy ponytail. You're putting things that subconsciously you're not attracted to. You're piling them on this character almost, again, on a subconscious level to tell people this is a bad person. This is a dislikable person. That dislikable individual probably has a life. Maybe this dislikable person is a great mom. Maybe he's a great friend or a great son to an ailing mother. Characters have more going on than what we see on the page. And there's many ways to communicate that. The first one is it has to have all of that in your head. If you created them to be full, to be multi-layered, to be nuanced, it'll come off on the page just naturally. If you lack respect for these characters, if you don't like them, if you don't give them absolutely any itty bitty thing that could create some kind of empathy, most of the times those characters fail. The problem with that is not having a completely awful, despicable character. If you have a child murderer, a sexual abuser, a harasser, obviously these characters are not going to be likable. I'm not telling you to make those characters good. What I'm saying is if you put on 100% negative elements on a character, and then you make him black or gay or Latino or a woman, it's going to just add up to all those elements. And then suddenly what we have is a character that might be read as this is a hood rat because he's Black and young and uneducated. And those are very, very problematic. The second lack, and this is the one that my students hate the most, the second lack is lack of research. If you go on Google and you type in trans woman, the first page of Google results are not what you need, all right? For you to grab a sandwich and for you to sit down and read those top 5 results on Google, those top 5 results are there because of SEO writing, all right? They are there because it's an interview with a very popular trans woman. It's written by somebody famous. It's something that came out in the New York Times or the LA Times or the New Yorker. That's how Google works. This doesn't mean that it's a serious piece of research that you should pay attention to. So what I tell folks to do is, number one, if you have the access, if you have the time, conduct interviews. You don't have to go to journalism school. You don't have to be a journalist or a sociologist or an ethnographer to learn how to ask questions. Talk to people. When I was writing Coyote songs, I knew that I had a mother, I had a pregnant woman in there, and I knew that being a woman and motherhood were going to be 2 huge elements in the book. Surprise, I'm not a woman, never been pregnant, never had a baby, never felt those hormones or had to give birth. I'm not going to wing it. I'm not going to wing it because many years ago I realized the following. As a Latino macho man, as a kid, you learn 2 things about pregnancy, right? Number one, every single woman in the world has a biological clock that tells them that they need to have a baby. We all know that's a lie, all right? So that knowledge went out the window as soon as I started talking to real women in the real world. So I forgot about that by the time I was like 12. And the second thing is that obviously pregnancy is absolutely amazing. It's the best thing that could ever happen to a woman. You get to eat cake. You get that pregnancy shine. Your hair looks awesome. Nobody gets acne. And then, I started talking to women who were pregnant, and I heard about hormones and depression and going deaf in one ear from being pregnant, and hormones raging and hair falling out and hair growing in other places and not being able to sleep and getting up in the middle of the night 27 times to go to the bathroom and not being able to work and leg pain and back pain and 1,000 other things that actually made it not that dream thing that people talk to me, especially men talk to me about how awesome pregnancy was. They knew absolutely anything. So the quote unquote knowledge that I received from them was completely clueless and worth absolutely nothing. So for this, at the time, I had already had a lot of contact with pregnant women. I had seen a child being born in person, so I had a little bit more knowledge. That said, I didn't have as much as I needed, so I left all of that at home, and I conducted 15 in-depth interviews with women who were mothers. What I learned was there's no single truth, because each and every one of these women had a very different memory, a very different experience, something very different to say about their pregnancy, and in half of the cases, or a little bit over half of the cases, their memories of having a child. That was firsthand knowledge. And even though it wasn't the same across the board, it was enough for me to know it wasn't what I had imagined when I was a kid or my young teens, my early teens. And there was much more to it than obviously a lot of men don't know about unless they care to ask. That's research. Those 15 in-depth interviews, that counts, all right? Reading the top 5 Google results will not give you an idea of what it's like to be a member of the LGBTQ community, what it's like to be a person of color in the United States, what it's like to live in the diaspora, what it's like to be, like in my case, a non-native speaker and have to translate everything in your head for years until you can just flip a switch and speak in another language, what it's like to be either highly educated in academia if you're not, or what it's like to not have a college education. If you have like a PhD, you don't know what it's like to be uneducated. Talk to people. That's the first thing when I talk about research. People are real. Anything that you're going to put on the page, and this is obviously sci-fi fantasy, we create entire races of different beings. It doesn't apply. When we're talking about writing humans, we want those humans to sound real. We want those humans to be real humans on the page. And in order for you to do that, if you're not a person that belongs to this particular group, if you're going to write about gay folks, you're going to write about Buddhists or Jewish folks, and you're not, talk to them. You don't have the time. You don't have the access. There's many tricks. I'll just give you one, but there are many. One that I like to give my students is turn off your Google and use Google Scholar, all right? Google Scholar will give you very serious, not LA Times, not New York Times, not interviews. They will give you results that are based on studies by scholars, psychologists, ethnographers, communicologists, doctors, chemists, biologists. You have experts writing about certain groups of people, whether it's the diaspora or what goes on inside a person who's becoming a different sex, or what that operation is like from one to the other. You can research that. You don't have to pay $40 for each one of those PDFs that are going to pop up. But those PDFs allow you to have a look at the beginning of that paper, and they usually give you access to either half or the entirety of their bibliography. Collect bibliographies. If you're looking into racism in 1920s Mississippi, talk to a librarian. All right. There are plenty of academic books and essays and chapters and peer-reviewed journal articles about that you can read in order to say, I wasn't alive and I wasn't a person of color in 1920s Mississippi, but I know enough to write confidently about that experience because I've spent X amount of hours listening to and reading what the true experts have to say. It's very hard for you to find somebody who was alive in 1920, who still remembers everything if they're alive. Or those people are out there and you just don't have access to them. That's fine. This other route also works. So there is absolutely no excuse to start creating lives and reality for other people that you don't know without ever putting in that research. If you've never been blind, you simply don't know what it's like to be blind. If you've never been bisexual, you don't know what that's like. If you've never been a person with an accent, just travel, because you'll go elsewhere and in that place you have an accent. But if you can't travel, you don't know what that's like. If you've never been rich or poor or black or Asian or a widow, but if you haven't been that person, you need to do your research. Otherwise, you run the risk of insulting a whole bunch of people. So lack of respect and lack of research. The last one that I want to talk about, because I want to cram this list into a very short thing, is prop characters. We try to take fiction, and it's a construction process, all right? And part of that construction process is character engineering. It's so complicated. you shouldn't call it just character development. It's character engineering. All right. You want to be as precise and as scientific as you can, while also understanding that this is a thing that we do, and we just create stories. We're telling lies, hopefully to tell another reality. But you're putting stuff in there. Nothing that you put in there should be a prop. All right. Nothing should just serve one purpose in your narrative. And that's double important when we're talking about people. I need somebody to shoot this individual so that we can get this story rolling. I'm going to make him one of those, quintessential cholo with a tattooed tear. Why? Wrong move. Why is it that the guy who has to pull the trigger at the beginning of your novel is a cholo? Does he have a name? Why is he there? What's his story? If you are finding your characters by just the first thing that comes to mind, this person doesn't have a life, they don't have a past, they don't have anything, then you're probably going to end up with a character that serves one purpose, and that's a prop character, and we don't want them in there. I saw some questions pop up, so let me see if I can tackle these. Joyce wants to know if you have access. Google Scholar is absolutely free. You can just type in Google Scholar in Google, and that will usually take you there. And a lot of the things that you're going to find in there, Joyce, they will ask you to pay. I don't want you to pay. I don't want you to invest a lot of money in that research. That said, if you collect bibliographies and there's like a book that, let's say you collected 7 of them, and there's one book about a very particular group of people that shows up in 2 or 3 or 4 of those bibliographies, I strongly suggest that you try to find a used copy of that book, because that probably means that it's a foundational text for whatever it is that you're researching. All of this is to say, do your research, have a lot of respect for your characters, and you should be sort of on the right track, hopefully. I want to talk right now about positionality, because in order to understand otherness, we have to first understand who we are. Positionality is not just when you think about yourself, you think, I'm 34. I'm female. I live in California. I was born in Texas. I'm an engineer. I have 1 kid. I've been married for 2 years. I have a cat. I make $70,000 a year. This is my education, and I'm a Christian. Those things matter. All right. Those things make you slightly who you are. If you go on a date, that's the type of information that you would probably give your friends. I'm going out with John. He's 28. He works at the Alamo Draft House. He's getting his degree in journalism. He has a brother and a sister. Those things matter, all right? But positionality says, go further. You're not just your career and your partner or your kids or your pets or your job. You are the end result of your childhood, your parents, your friends, your education or lack thereof, your political thought, your ideologies, your religion, your friends after you grew up, the places that you've lived in, the cultures that you've participated in and been immersed in, the music and literature and art that you enjoy and consume, and the way that affects you, your sexuality. You are all of those things. And you sort of become based on the collection of how all of those things interact. If you go to a very, very, very white state and you enter a room as a person of color and you look around, chances are that if there is another person of color in there and you sort of, your eyes meet, they will give you the nod, all right? They will give you the nod. just as you need to have an understanding that if I go to downtown Austin and I go into a bar and I decide to wait for my friend at the bar, I can grab a beer and I can grab my phone and I can sit there at the bar with my beer and I can play on my phone until my friend shows up. If you're a woman, you understand that that is not your reality. It doesn't matter who you're waiting for or what you're wearing. If you're a woman alone sitting at a bar, there's a very high chance that somebody will approach you with either clear intentions or just to offer you a drink or just to ask you what you're doing there. I don't have to deal with those things. Women deal with those things. Men don't. Positionality is basically understand that each and every human being has a past, a present, a future, hopes, dreams, religion, political thoughts, a philosophy, a sexuality, a family, friends that have an influence on them, art that sort of affects the way that they see life. Once you understand all of your own positionality, and the best way to do that is put in one of your favorite records and ask yourself as many questions as you can. Usually it doesn't take that much because you're interrogating yourself, which means that you already know the answer before you're done formulating the question. So you sit there for 5 minutes nonstop and you go, who am I? Where was I born? Where do I live now? Do I like men, women, both? How do I dress? What's my relationship like to my parents? Do I have a relationship with my parents? What are my political views? What are my philosophical views? How much money do I make? If I got fired tomorrow, could I survive a year finding another job, or would I be desperate in 30 days? What's my education? Where have I traveled? What's my favorite type of music? What's my favorite food? If somebody asked me to explain my culture to them, what would I say? You ask all of those things, and immediately you have the response in your head because it's you, and nobody knows you better than you. If you do that, you immediately have the ability to ask the same questions of your characters. This cholo with the tattooed tear that you're going to put in 2 paragraphs at the beginning of the book, you don't have to spend 5 minutes asking him those questions. But you should spend 30 to 45 seconds on a character that's going to be on your book or your story or your narrative nonfiction piece, whatever it is that you're doing. This individual will be there as long as this thing exists. So you should spend that 1 minute asking that character some questions in order for you to have a serious understanding of where this individual is coming from. A lot of people don't do that, and I really want you to do that. I really want you to ask yourself who you are so that you can start having a much clearer understanding of the things that you know, the things where you're comfortable talking about, the things that you think belong to your culture, and then in that process, a lot of gaps in your knowledge will be revealed. So if you're asking yourself about your friends and it turns out that you don't have any gay friends, then your knowledge of the LGBTQ community comes at you through probably books, television, and social media. How deep is your knowledge? Or you could say, well, I have a brother and he's gay. And he's my younger brother, and I've seen the whole process. Oh, you have a very profound, special, emotional knowledge of what it's like for this one individual in this city, in this state, in this family with these values, which gives you a lot of information about one person that you can use. But also it gives you the knowledge that not every gay young man experiences life and his sexuality or coming out of the closet or family acceptance and love or rejection in the same way, which leads you back to do your research, talk to folks so that you can spot those those similarities in what they've done and those differences, which is what you want to take care of in your narrative. The point that I really want you to take home about positionality is when you're talking about otherness in fiction, it's that magical thing that allows you to do a couple of things. Number one, you can present a character in a very rich way. I'm not saying that you need to write a biography whenever you introduce a new character. Just think about the way that you meet people and you make friends. You don't get to know everything about that individual the first day that you meet them. Throughout years of being friends, you learn a lot about them, and ultimately you never know everything about them. Our characters are the exact same way. Don't stop your narrative in its tracks to give us 7 pages of biography. However, take the most important elements and let them guide your character development, or use them in your narrative from time to time. Sprinkle a little bit in about who they are and where they come from. When you do that, the character is much more nuanced. It's a lot richer. And that will help you hopefully create something that when folks who belong to that group read it, they won't feel insulted because you're creating something that it's completely humane and it sounds like that. But the second and most important thing that positionality does is, like, if you really understand it and you learn how to use it, it is the magical thing that allows you to manipulate the way that your readers feel and react to your characters. Let's say I have 2 friends, which is the story that I always tell my students. I have 2 friends, Freddie and Bobby. All right. I tell you that Freddie, you and I, we go every Friday. We sit on the hoods of our cars, and we I don't know, what do? We go to a convenience store here in Austin, and we sit in our cars and we sip adult beverages. You get your 40, and I'm classy. I'll get some 2020. I'll drink my 2020, and you'll drink your 40, which is perfect math. And then one day we hear a scream, and then Freddie comes out, and he has a snub-nosed 38 and some dollar bills in his hand, and he just bolts down the street and disappears. And I chuckle, and I look down at my shoes, and I say, "That's my boy Freddie." I met him a couple years ago. He really wants to have a Porsche. He wants a sports car. He's dying to have like a really nice car. So he's sticking up joints up and down Austin to get that money. Your thoughts will probably be, Freddie needs to stop. Freddie needs to go to jail. Freddie's putting the life of whoever is working at the convenience store in danger. And that's a really stupid way of going about getting a sports car. The next Friday we're there, and deja vu, we hear a scream. This time, a second man comes running out with a fistful of bills and a snub-nosed 38, and he looks at us and then runs away. And this time I look down again, but I don't chuckle. I say, "Wow, that's my boy Bobby." Where to start? Bobby was living in Houston with his wife and 2 kids. Kids were doing great. He was working construction. So mom had to take the kids to school every day, and they were in a horrible accident. She almost got decapitated. The kid's now 13. He was a baseball player. He's now in a wheelchair for life. The girl obviously has PTSD. He came to Austin because he needed, he's living with his mother-in-law because they needed help with the kids, and he needed to find a job with the pandemic. He went downhill, and now the mother-in-law has stomach cancer, and it's pretty advanced. And I don't have to keep going. Because as soon as I brought the kids, the accident, the dead mom, and freaking cancer into the conversation, your mind is not saying Bobby needs to go to prison. Your mind is not saying Bobby is a horrible person and Bobby is going about getting money the wrong way. Your brain, depending on your levels of empathy, is probably thinking, is there a way for us to help Bobby and his kids? Is there a way for him to not do this? And do I know anybody who can hook him up with a job? They're both men. They're both doing something bad. They're both committing a crime with the same type of gun under the same circumstances to our eyes. All the bits of information that I gave you about their lives and their motivations, their positionalities in life, made you think different about those two. And that's the wonder that you have. You have all this control as you're crafting your narrative to give your reader bits of information that hopefully shapes the way that they see your character. If you think there's a very bad character in your novel that absolutely needs to be gay, this assassin is a member of the LGBTQ community, he's a gay assassin, 98% of that individual can be just about being an assassin. But then why is this person gay, right? So the other thing that I really want you to take home here is motivation. Whenever you're dealing with otherness, yes, we want diversity. Yes, we want representation. When you're tackling otherness and you're putting all these characters that belong to different groups of people in your stories, ask yourself, why am I doing this? You have to have a complete, wonderful, full-fledged answer for that. If you start putting Black folks in your books just because you feel that there's a need to show representation, you're probably going to fail at it. If you think, well, I have to put in some Latinx folks here because it takes place in California, you're probably going to fail at that. Each story that you tell has a reason for being, and you probably have a very clear idea of what it is that you want to accomplish with that narrative. Each and every part that goes into that narrative, each and every element that you use in your storytelling must have a reason for being. The most important of all of those is your characters. Why are you making them the way that they are? And if they're not the characters that come from the same place that you come from, they don't have your same beliefs, they didn't grow up the same way, in the same family, with the same amount of money and the same education, they don't think the same way that you do in terms of religion and politics and sexuality. If they're physically different than you, then stop and start thinking about the reasons why you're making those characters that way. We have about 10 minutes before Helen jumps in here and cuts this whole thing off. So I do want to tackle some questions because I saw another one coming in here. Or did I? Oh, there it is. Follow up to historical research on historical otherness. Who are the best people for sensitivity readerships for those stories? That's a great question. How does one find them, and how does one know what is reasonable payment? I've done sensitivity reads. I'm not a fan, and I'll tell you why. I'm not a fan because 3/4 of the time when somebody asks me to do one, I have to say no. I have to say no because knowing how to research otherness is not the same as understanding every single type of otherness. I've gotten questions about doing sensitivity reads for different Native American tribes. I don't belong to any. I don't have enough knowledge to say, I'm going to go through your narrative and I'm going to make sure that you don't butch it up. My problem with sensitivity reads right now is that it's becoming a business. So you will encounter folks online who say, you send us your narrative, and I don't know, $800, and we'll send it to an expert. But they won't tell you who that expert is or what makes that person an expert. So what ends up happening is somebody gets paid for, takes your money, and then let's say you're 27 years old, you're from Haiti, and you're a lesbian, and then they send me your book because you're writing about 1950s corrupt cops in New York. I'm not old enough to talk about the 50s. I don't get along with the cops very well historically. I'll read it and I'll do some research in order to try to help you with that historical research. And then you'll get whatever it is that you get. If we don't have a conversation, if we don't sit down and have some sort of Zoom meeting where we talk about this, and I'll tell you exactly what I've done to become the go-to voice, the expert in this thing, then I don't think that's really a good business, or that it is beneficial for you. How do you find them? You're probably working within a genre, and within that genre, you've met other writers. Ask around. This is one of those things where it's great to complain and share things on social media. Social media is also a great tool. If you don't know any trans men, get on Twitter and ask, hey, does anybody know any trans men that I can interview for this piece? Because I'm talking about a trans character and I really want to get it right. The same goes with sensitivity reads. You want to see who's worked with whom and how that whole thing turned out before you fork over a couple $100 for somebody to read that narrative and tell you that they know exactly what they're talking about, especially if there's not going to be something like this where it's face-to-face and they can ask you questions. Why did you do this? Why not present it this way? So it is tricky. I'm glad that it's happening. I'm glad that folks are paying attention. I'm glad that people are saying, hey, I'm not Native American, but I have these characters and these practices and this entire culture in my narrative. I want somebody who knows. I'm glad that folks are looking for that. I'm just a little bit scared that now it's turning into a business. And when you put money first instead of making the narrative better, it's very easy to just say yes. You know, Native American, sure, send me your book. I'll tell you if you did it right. And then I'll come up with a little letter and then just pay me, and I don't even have to read the whole thing. It is tricky. The other very tricky thing about historical fiction is that historical fiction implies that you're going to travel back in time. And that means that history will be present. And history is awfully racist and misogynistic. So anything from, go to the kitchen and make me a sandwich to you don't even have the right to vote, to slavery, to right now we call them, Black folks, African Americans. That's not the terms. Nobody was calling Black folks African Americans 60 or 80 years ago. So it sort of forces you to accept that if you're going to be writing, and I said 1920s Mississippi, if you have a group of white folks in the 1920s in a bar, young white men talking about people of color, they're going to use very specific words, and it's not going to work. If it's a historical fiction, it's not going to really work as historical if you have these characters say things like, "Oh, the young African American man who works with me." It's not going to happen. So it's sort of like going into the dirt and then having to use that dirt and that ugliness to create this narrative. So Leslie, best of luck to you. I have I'm a journalist by training and by academia. So all of the respect to you and the amount of research that you're going to have to put into creating historical research. Let me know if there are any other questions, because I see one here, and that's the only one that I had in the little Q&A box. In any case, while you think about your questions, my name, last name, Gabino Iglesias @gmail. You can reach me there now or ever if you have any questions about this thing. You're also cordially invited. Next time that you see on social media that I'm doing the full workshop, which is usually about 2 hours, you're all invited. Come for free, stay around. We have really interesting conversations. The most important thing that we talk about is how nobody has all the answers. You will not be able to please absolutely everybody when you're talking about otherness. And I think if you have 5 minutes today, it will be very nice if you could go read today's news, today's discussions on In the Heights, and Rita Moreno and Lin-Manuel Miranda, and the lack of Afro Latinos in Latino movies historically, and I think it talks about everything that we're talking about right now. Just wanted to say thank you. No, Leah, thank you. The thing about positionality is really funny. There's a whole other conversation that we need to have, and I just want to touch on it very briefly because it's a very scary subject before Helen jumps in here, and that's the idea of cultural appropriation. When I give my violence workshops, I give them 3 guiding questions, all right? And those are 3 guiding questions that adapted also work very well when you're dealing with otherness. You're working on a story, you're working on a novel, you're working on a novella, and you're going to introduce a person of color, a disabled person, a little person, somebody who learns differently, somebody with a different physicality, a member of the LGBTQ community. Ask yourself 3 questions, and I already kind of gave you the first one. What's the purpose? What are you getting out of this? Are you making this character gay just because you wanted to check, that little box? You wanted to put a check mark there. I have diverse fiction now because there's a gay woman in my novel. Number 2, and this is kind of the literary equivalent of doing a little bit of acting, method acting. I want you to step out of the narrative, take off your writing hat, and try to imagine that you are a reader who belongs to that group of people. And how are they going to see that? Are people of color or women or gay folks or disabled folks or Native American folks, are they magical always in your books? Are they always the bad people? Think about the way that your audience is going to receive this thing. And then if you can say, this is why I'm doing it, and this is the way that it will serve my readers, finally ask, is there a reason for the narrative? Not for you. You and the narrative are 2 separate things, because once you write it, you hopefully get it published, and it no longer belongs to you. It has wings. It will go away. It belongs to the readers. And now what you have to do is sit down while you work on the next one and deal with the feedback that you'll start getting from readers. I didn't like what you did. I don't like having another language in there, which is one that I get all the time. I didn't think you nailed that blind person. I don't think your LGBTQ character was well developed. There's nothing you can do. The thing is out in the world. So start thinking about the way that you did what you wanted. You kind of hope this is how readers from that group will react to it. And now start thinking about the narrative itself. There has to be some kind of need for that otherness in your elements, or there has to be some kind of level of truth. I'm sick and tired of reading novels set in Chicago, Miami, Austin, Dallas, Houston, California, LA. And there's 60 characters in these novels. Everybody's white. It doesn't work like that in the real world. So it shouldn't work like that in your narrative. And I think that's it, because I think Diane's coming in here to hose us down and then send us home.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry to end this. It was a really fascinating discussion, and thank you so much for all your wonderful 101 workshop. And you all can still register for this program. Also find information about other upcoming library programs at jocolibrary.org/events. And you can find more resources for writers at jocolibrary.org. We recommend for writers.